This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, former state senator and chair of the State Board of Education, Howard Lee. We've got former Representative Gene Arnold from the County of Nash, and the current Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch. On this show, we're going to update you on the revised budget, talk about how much money the state spends on K-12 public education, and discuss the update of clean water rules as a result of the coal ash spill. Should be a lot of good conversation, so let's get started. Legislators are dog-tired in these dog days of summer, and there's a lot of barking going on between the House, the Senate, and the governor over teacher pay, teacher assistance, and Medicaid eligibility. Governor McCrory suggested he might call them over to the mansion, serve up some bologna sandwiches, and tell them to stay there until they got the job done. The Senate did come forward this week with some new wrinkles regarding teacher pay, but at the end of the day, it still basically eliminated teacher assistance. Howard Lee, you sat in on a lot of these budget conferences. Both sides have dug in now, but it appears the Senate yielded a little bit this past week. Was it because public opinion was running against them, or what was the reason?
I think several things happened. Certainly the Senate's actions in the last meetings they had publicly, getting up and walking out, didn't put the Senate in a very positive light. The second is the public tended to feel, at least people with whom I've spoken, that the House budget was a much more reasonable budget and was a much more solid approach to giving teachers raises. And the third is I think the governor coming out and taking a strong stand in threatening to veto the Senate budget had a lot to do with it as well. I'm a great proponent of having closed-door meetings because I've often found going through this process that there's a lot more respect and honesty and openness among the negotiators when they're behind closed doors.
But isn't there a lot of posturing when they're doing this in the public?
Absolutely. I think a TV camera has a way of making the legislators behave in a way not only to play to the camera, but to play to their constituents as well.
Yeah. I have to put a caveat saying that at the time that we recorded this program, there was no finalized agreement on a state budget. But Gene, I want to, the Senate yielded on teacher pay from 11% to 8%. But essentially what they did is they said that to 8%. Essentially they were going to eliminate teacher assistants in the third grade and fund them only on a temporary or one-time basis for the first and second grade going forward. Now, for all intents and purposes, weren't they just sending a signal that we're getting rid of teacher assistants? And is the House going to be willing to go along with that?
Well, I don't think the House will, unless you get right down to the last minute. They may agree, but it doesn't make any sense when they are pushing for reading at the third grade to eliminate the teacher assistants in the third grade and keep them in the second grade. Your first test occur with the children in the third grade. So it made more sense if they stayed in the third grade, which says to me they're posturing and they are willing to come off, I think, eventually and soon with giving up the teacher assistants altogether. I think they'll keep the teacher assistants in and come to some other conclusion on the budget.
Well, Nelson Dollar came up, Chris, with sort of an alternative to this, and I gathered that he was trying to help the Senate save a little face here, perhaps, and said, okay, let's just come up with a baseline amount of teacher pay increase and leave it up to the local districts to decide whether to use some of it to keep teacher assistants or not. What are the advantages and disadvantages of a proposal like that?
Well, the advantages are they could say that they're giving local schools more control. They can also say that, it's a way to come to a compromise. The thing that it doesn't do is doesn't guarantee teachers a specific raise, and it doesn't guarantee that there'll be teacher assistants in the classrooms. I think this is sort of a fascinating move. Governor McCrory actually said he would veto a bill that gave teachers a bigger than 6% raise. Well, this is an 8% raise. and it still cuts half the teacher assistants, as you mentioned, and gives one-time money to the other ones. I thought the governor's role, Howard mentioned that, which is really interesting. It's pretty unusual for a governor of one party, of the same party of the House and the Senate, to come out so strongly on one side. Usually what they would say is, I have concerns about this, I have concerns about that, now you guys figure it out. But
well, Mike Easley had done that, had he not, John?
Not threatening a specific veto, I'm not sure. He did talk about how he had a veto pen or veto power. Let's clarify a few matters before we get too far down the pike. First grade teacher assistants were never part of any discussion and still are.
Right.
So they're not touched at all either way. Representative Dollar may be involved in budget negotiations, but he had nothing to do with the proposal about flexibility.
I see.
It seems to me that is the likely deal, is that ultimately the Senate will agree with the House on a minimum raise that will be 6.5, something like that. And then there will be additional dollars identified within the teacher assistant. Remember, the teacher assistant money doesn't only pay for teacher assistants. Years ago, back under previous administrations, people back then actually read the research and understood that teacher assistants, except in first grade and kindergarten, don't seem to have much of an effect on outcomes. So what they did is they gave school districts, and there were many superintendents at the time who used this flexibility to convert some of the teacher assistant positions into teachers or bus drivers or whatever else. So what I think is going to happen, I hope it happens, is that they're going to make a deal where they identify this additional pot of money, and if school districts want to use it for teacher assistants or anything else as they currently do, there will be absolutely no change. But if instead they want to convert some of that money into teacher pay increases, then they could go above the 6% for certain teachers. I think that is a reasonable compromise and might be the outcome.
The problem that creates is differentiated pay. And that is something that the teachers union does not want, and it's very difficult to implement at the local level because it appears to be showing partisanship or
and Howard, aren't the local governments, the local school boards, aren't they sort of fixed into into local budgets? It started into effect July 1st. Isn't all of this discussion really going to have an impact on them?
Oh, it's going to have a tremendous impact on them because they really are finding themselves without a lot of wiggle room. And so as we continue to have this conversation and uncertainty unveils, it's putting them in a terrible position to be able to make decisions going forward. We're in the middle of July, and school is going to open about the middle of August. Some schools will start. And any decisions that are to be made need to be done fairly quickly to sign contracts and do whatever else needs to be done to get the personnel in place.
All right, I want to continue this discussion because we hadn't even gotten around to Medicaid yet, and that's a big part of what's holding it up, and we'll do that in just a moment. For those of you saying you'd like to have more NC Spin, I've got good news for you. You can have additional video content from our panel and from other leading opinion makers in our state, all on our website, ncspin.com. After each show, we tape what we call the after spin, asking these guys to tell us what they wish they'd said on the show but didn't get around to doing, as well as other comments also. In addition, we've got NC Spin Perspectives posts throughout the week. In fact, this past week, we did a great NC Spin Perspectives interview with Joe Stewart from NC Free Enterprise Foundation. So check it out in print, on video, ncspin.com all during the week, or you can catch us at NC Spin on Facebook or at NC Spin Tweets. More budget discussion after these messages.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Baseball players from other countries are considered guest workers here. Baseball, the previous administration and Congress cut a deal in 2006 allowing foreign players to travel freely across the country. Not so for agriculture guest workers. They're vilified for doing work Americans won't, and they face a mountain of red tape just to get here. Shouldn't American agriculture get the same consideration as baseball? Farm Bureau and Agriculture, we keep North Carolina growing.
Your family physician supports Medicaid reform. That's good for North Carolina patients, providers, and taxpayers.
For over a year, we've worked with the Governor and the General Assembly on a plan for responsible Medicaid reform.
The Senate's proposed Medicaid changes are a departure from this plan. Changes that could lead to a decrease in the number of primary care physicians providing care in communities that need them the most.
The destruction of our state's medical home network, a network that prevents unnecessary hospital and emergency room visits,
and disregards the elderly, the blind, and disabled, and the health care they need. care we're morally and legally obligated to provide.
Now is not the time to disregard the progress we've made. Now is the time for lawmakers to implement responsible Medicaid reform that protects and improves health care for all North Carolinians.
Visit rnchealthcare.com and tell your lawmaker to support responsible Medicaid reform.
The best part about being a member of a Touchstone Energy Cooperative is that it's your Touchstone Energy Cooperative. Learn more about the power of your co-op membership at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
We want to pick back up on our discussion about the budget negotiations that are being taken going forward. And I want to talk about the Senate's proposal for Medicaid because when the Senate came forward this week, and instead of eliminating the eligibility for 30,000 aged, blind, and disabled and medically needed people, they cut it down to about 5,000. Is this palatable to the House, John? Is this going to fly? Is this a good idea?
I don't think the House will accept the Senate's counter proposal on this, but it did move them closer together. Now the two Medicaid budgets are about $30 million apart in state general fund dollars. I think the House is willing to budge a little bit on eligibility, but probably not that much. So there's a short-term Medicaid dispute, which they've almost settled. But then there's the long-term issues that have to do with the management of Medicaid and how it's structured going forward with accountable care organizations or managed care or both.
That's the Medicaid reform proposal.
Yeah, well, it's all reform of a sort, but it's like a short-term issue and a long-term issue. And they're not going to settle the managed care or accountable care issue this year. And the Senate tried this week to actually nudge forward the idea of setting up a separate agency, separate department with a majority of the commission, oversight commission, actually appointed by the legislature rather than the governor, that would take over Medicaid. I don't think they really expected that to happen this year, so much of that is going to be pushed off into a study or a discussion for 2015, and what we've got left is this very specific short-term issue that has to do with eligibility guidelines.
There are a lot of people feel like Bob Rucho just threw this new proposal on the table just to cloud the issues and make it a straw horse to make sure nothing was going to happen.
I think that's the effect of it, although I don't think any major, I agree with John, no major Medicaid decision, dramatic overhaul is going to happen, especially the last couple of weeks of the session. The Senate proposal, the medical society, the hospitals are very upset about it, don't like it. They don't think it allows community care to continue in its current role, and the same issues that we've talked about before. This is not going to go anywhere. But what's fascinating to me is that the Senate has come closer to the House position on Medicaid, but as you mentioned, there's still 5,000 medically needy seniors who will be kicked off the Medicaid rolls, and I will all but guarantee you that Tom Tillis will not be running for the U.S. Senate voting for a bill that kicks 5,000 people who are the most vulnerable people in North Carolina off of health care rolls. It just is a political, it would be terrible for his Senate race. So I think it's the wrong thing to do, but it's also a terrible political thing for Tillis to do.
Howard, one interesting note, the Senate has moved all pending legislation over to the Senate Rules Committee, and so that Tom Apodaca can sort of be the traffic cop there. And Governor McCrory essentially alluded this past week to the fact that this was reminiscent of the days when Mark Bassnight and Tony Rand were running the Senate. I want to know, what was your response to that? And what do you think about the idea of putting everything in rules?
It could be reminiscent of the history of North Carolina politics because that kind of action goes back quite a ways. I think it depends on the outcome. I've never had a problem with Tony Rand being the traffic cop or Apodaca, as long as the intentions are good and they will go ahead and respond to the members and move legislation in a timely manner to the floor for action.
It's also interesting, though, he also said that the way the Senate was acting reminded him of Harry Reid in Washington, which really rankled some folks, and that did not help his relationship with the state Senate.
All right, so John, we had, I want to change gears here. We had runoff elections this past week. Some interesting outcomes taking place. Phil Berger Jr., who led the ticket in House District 6 up in the Greensboro area. Mark Walker, minister, called for a runoff. All of the big name politicos lined up behind Berger, but he lost. What happened?
First of all, they didn't all line up behind Berger.
Well,
in fact,
a lot of them
two
did.
important people in Guilford County,
yes,
actually 3 important people, including Tom Phillips, who was a former long-term Greensboro City Councilman, but John Blust, a representative that represents Guilford County, and most importantly, B.J. Barnes, who was the long-term sheriff, Republican sheriff of Guilford County. They supported Walker. Guilford County was not the entire story here, but it was a big part of the story. Remember that Berger, who is a district attorney based in Rockingham County, had been the initial leader of the vote in a multi-candidate field in which many of the other candidates were from Greensboro and Guilford County. That had split that vote. That cohered around Mark Walker. It didn't explain his entire victory because he actually won Rockingham County too, but it certainly explains the margin of victory. There are about as many theories explaining this outcome as there are the number of people in the entire state of North Carolina
Gene,
not working for Walker who predicted that he would win.
Gene, our good friend Eddie Caldwell, who heads up the North Carolina Sheriff's Association, would say to us, you can't ever underestimate the power of political power of a sheriff.
That's true. Highest elected official in the county. I think what also backfired in that particular election was the heavy spending by the PACs. And I think that people
and the negative tenor of that spending.
And hopefully people are getting tired of that. And if you see a couple of more races like this go that way, perhaps that will have some effect on future races. Send them a message.
Send them a message. All right. After these messages, we're going to come back and talk about education spending.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Hi, I'm Linda Loveland. I want the best for my kids. Feeding them foods they like within my budget is a priority. But what do we really know about these foods? North Carolina farmers and food experts give you a website to find it all. FeedTheDialogueNC.com, a place where moms like you and me can learn more about the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. Check it out. Add your input and help feed the dialogue. Let's talk food at FeedTheDialogueNC.com.
CCANC is an organization that really tries to help everybody enjoy their moments fishing. They try to help create awareness. They also work on trying to protect our resources so that it'll be there for our children as well.
I think another consistent theme that we all have is we want to leave the resource in better shape than we found it.
You know, CCA do so many different things, be it a habitat project, restoring oysters, maybe working for good conservation and good management, going fishing and sharing a passion for a healthy resource.
There's plenty of fish for everybody. There's fish for commercial guys, there's fish for recreational guys, if it's managed in an effective and scientific way.
We have that world record style fishery here, but we've got to make science-based management the future of our fisheries management policies, and then we'll be moving forward, and our legislature needs to know that.
Become a member today at ccanc.org/join.
We now return to NC Spin.
WRAL Television recently did an analysis of education spending over the past 30 years and reported that in 1984, spending for K-12 public schools amounted to 43.7% of the state's general fund spending. But by the 2013-14 budget, that percentage had dropped to 37%. Senate Rules Chair Tom Apodaca was quoted as saying that we'd been balancing the budget on the backs of K-12 for the past 30 years. Gene, you chaired the Public School Forum, and you've observed a lot of these trends. Just how important is the percentage that we spend on education? Is this what we ought to be focusing on? What percentage of dollars we're spending, or are there some other yardsticks we ought to be looking at?
I don't think it's fair to even go by percentages anymore because the budget is going to always go up. I think you have to focus more on the dollars. And I think one way that you could do this, but I doubt it would ever be enacted, is that once money is allocated, they keep that money. And then the next year, you allocate new money for the new enrollment and the cost of that new enrollment. If you have an old program that goes away, let that money stay in the school districts instead of taking it away and changing it for something else.
Chris, a lot of people are saying, okay, sure, it's going to go down because what has happened during this period of time is that Medicaid expenditures have gone up, have risen so much. Is that a logical explanation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned that the percentage has gone down. I think it's one of many things to look at. You know, I'm concerned that we spend $560 million less on public schools now than we did before the Great Recession if you adjust for inflation. You can pick any period of time. I don't think we're adequately funding public education. I don't think this budget adequately funds public education. We have a budget this year, in effect, that spends $15 per student for textbooks, whether it's digital or hard copy. One textbook costs $35. We're clearly not spending enough money in our public schools.
Howard, you were chair of the State Board of Education. In 1984, we spent $1.89, almost $1.9 billion, and by 2013, it was $7.9 billion. When the taxpayers of North Carolina take a look at this, inflation didn't grow that much. Why such an explosion in the education budget, and are we getting our money's worth?
Well, I think that certainly is up for debate in some quarters, but we've also had an explosion in the number of students
kids,
who are coming into our school system, and those students have to be serviced. A county like Wake every year has to look at whether or not it's going to build additional schools. But you have some of the small counties that are really struggling to try to have the resources available to teachers to be able to do the job that they're doing. So I think, as Chris has indicated, a number of factors that we got to think about. Rather than just looking at how much money we spend, we need to look at some other factors.
So, John, what's our takeaway from this?
Our takeaway from this is that last year we spent about $8,700 a student, and that is essentially double what we spent in 1984. There isn't anything else to say. You cannot measure this as a percentage of the general fund when Medicaid is rising at such a rapid rate. You simply want to know how many dollars do we spend per student. It's a very simple story. I wish they had told it.
All right. Well, when we come back, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Does your North Carolina business or organization have a story to tell? I'm Richard Campbell, and at Carolina Broadcasting and Publishing, we help tell stories that connect you to the people who will respond. We take the time to understand our clients' needs and what makes them unique. We craft their stories through the efficient use of words, images, and videos that resonate with their desired audience. We also know that a good story is incomplete without a call to action. On video, on air, online, and in print, from concept to final production, no one can help tell your story more effectively or affordably than we can. For special introductory offers, visit carolinabroadcasting.com or call 919-832-1416. Again, that's carolinabroadcasting.com. Let us help tell your story today.
Where do you go when you need to know? ANC makes it easy for you to get the information you need to make well-informed public policy decisions. Our members are industry leaders who are ready to share their industry-specific insights with you. Want to hear both sides of the story? ANC members can tell you. Just use the ANC member directory as your guide or call us directly. ANC members have the knowledge, expertise, and perspective you need to create public policies that are good for North Carolina. We are ready for your call.
We now return to NC Spin.
This is my favorite part of the show. We ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. They get to choose the topic. They get to expound on it for a few seconds. John Hood, we're going to start with you. Tell us something we don't know.
Tom, we hear all the time that bipartisanship is dead and nothing ever gets done in Washington or in Raleigh. But in 2011, a bipartisan bill signed by a Democratic governor but proposed by a Republican, the Judicial Reinvestment Act, was passed. And it made a number of changes in criminal justice law, admissions, and probation and parole and so forth. And since then, our admissions to prison have gone down 26%. Now, it was going down before then, but only by about 5% the previous 2 years. So it's premature to declare victory entirely, but this appears to be a successful bipartisan reform and should be a model for other kinds of cooperation.
That's good news at a time when we need to hear some good news about bipartisan support. Howard Lee, tell us something we don't know.
I was reviewing a report by the National Teacher Quality Center and was quite interested in the fact that most of our institutions of higher education in the area of teacher training did not make the top 15. The one school that was in the top 15 was Elon University, which is doing an outstanding job in training teachers.
One of the best kept secrets in our state.
In our state, and one of the institutions we should celebrate.
Yeah. Good point. Glad you brought that up. Gene, tell us something we don't know.
Well, it's something that you always hear about this time of year anyway, but this is only the second year of the governor's tenure. And you're beginning to hear, not only from senators, but on the street, one-term governor.
Really?
I've heard it from several people who are not political followers, but they're saying, this has got to be a one-term governor.
Is that because he's going to be elected president?
No, I don't think so.
Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
We talked about on this show about Medicaid reform. We talk about it every so often on the show. The subtext to the current Medicaid reform debate is that nobody in Raleigh except Pat McCrory has confidence in Health and Human Services Secretary Aldona Vosch. The News Observer did a story recently where they had emails during the Medicaid reform discussions inside the department, which sort of reminded a lot of people about her unusual.
Charlotte told her to resign.
Well, yeah. Right. So did Asheville. So did other papers. But the latest emails show her unusual management style. Legislators will tell you privately they have no confidence in her leadership. That's not the only reason. That's one reason they want to get Medicaid out of HHS. So the question is how long she'll remain in that department.
Interesting. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. Next week, we hope you'll join us. We hope we'll have a budget to talk about by that time, but we certainly will take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.